Hi, I'm Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce Communications Director Dan Smith, and the New York State on Pause initiatives related to the COVID-19 pandemic have impacted businesses greatly, and we are hearing from many types of businesses, some who have had to shut down operations completely until it's over, some are getting by as best they can, some are even helping out with the response, and one of those businesses is Rochester Chamber member Century Mold. I'm joined now by Century Mold President and CEO Ron Ricotta. Ron, first off, how is the company getting by during this New York State on Pause initiative?
Well, it's been a challenge. Rochester is the headquarters of Century Mold. We're a 900-person company with 150 people in Rochester. Started here in Rochester. We're primarily automotive, and we're the sole source for our parts for new vehicles. Roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of the vehicles made in North America have our parts. So when Ford and GM and Mercedes and everyone shuts down, our people have no work. So we're dealing with having a lot of employees and no work to give them. We have found some things to use in Rochester to occupy our people, particularly the SHIELD program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But in general, it's been a challenge, but fortunately we got a company that spent a lot of years putting ourselves in position to weather a storm, and this is a storm we'll weather as well as we can, and we're not worried about the future. We just need to get through this dark period.
Well, let's talk about the employees. How many have you had to put on pause during the initiative so far?
Well, here was our strategy. Our strategy was that anyone who made less than the comparable benefit from getting unemployment and didn't have work, we put on furlough. We thought of it as a compassionate way to go about that. So if you look at the federal unemployment, which is $600 a week, that's comparable to like $15 an hour. And then you take their New York State unemployment, if we're talking about New York State, you know, someone can make somewhere between $22 and $24 an hour if they're on unemployment. So if they're working for us making $15 an hour, we thought it was better to put them on a furlough so they can collect that unemployment. And on top of that, we picked up 100% of their medical during this period. So if you look at pure numbers, so we got plants all over. So if I took Rochester, let me leave Rochester off to the side for a second. The plants in Nashville and in Cincinnati and in Detroit, that affected about 100 people. In Rochester, it would affect about 80 people, but we've converted to making face shields for Rochester Regional Health, amongst others. So we haven't furloughed anybody yet in Rochester, but we're going to probably do a little of that next week. We have 500 people in Mexico, and under Mexico law, we got to keep them all on payroll, and none of them can work. So roughly 700 of our 900 people are still on our payroll, and eventually we'll be up to 200 people who are on a furlough who make below that $24 an hour rate.
Let's talk about Rochester operations. Now, tell me about the challenge it was to refit your operations to start making these personal protective equipment for medical purposes.
Well, it was a great honor. Obviously, it's a terrible situation, but roughly 3 weeks ago, we got contacted by Rochester Regional Health. We met with the head of surgery and the head of anesthesia on a Friday. By Saturday, we had developed prototypes. By Sunday, in a prototype atmosphere, we put them into the operating rooms. They were very pleased with them. We built tools that normally take 8 to 10 weeks in about 4 days. And we, on Monday coming up, which is a little bit more than 3 weeks later, we'll finish supplying 25,000 shields to Rochester Regional. On top of that, now we've supplied a whole healthcare system up in Canton, St. Lawrence. And there's been a number of other businesses and non-for-profits that we've supplied these shields for. So it was a great honor. It was a lot of work. Our guys worked 24 hours a day and exhausted, but very proud of it. And on top of that, the shield we built, we're quite proud of because it's more protective than the average shield you'll see on TV. Typical shield on TV is more straight, you know, with a strap on top. Ours was geared more towards the surgeons and the hospital caretakers. It includes a much more robust shield with underneath the neck protection and wider around to the ears. So not only did we move quick, we were able to provide a much more protective shield for them.
Now, is this something that's going to be ongoing, or is this just a limited run?
We don't know. We don't know. What the hardest part of this whole thing was, which surprised me, when I say we, my people did, not me personally, worked miracles, but we were about ready to go into production a week later after we met with Rochester Regional, and all of a sudden there was a major scarcity of the clear plastic on the front of the shield, and we had our shipment diverted. I have a feeling it was for reasons that were profit motivated, but we had to do a lot of work to get it back. So right now we have enough plastic to provide 100,000 shields. We've already produced about 40,000. And if we can get more plastic, we'll go past 100,000. But we're going to produce all 100,000 shields, and we'll see who has a need for them. And we want to keep some set aside for the charities in Rochester. But it's been pretty action-packed, fast-paced.
And shifting back now to the business impact, Ron, you told me earlier before we started recording this that you are exploring the government programs through the CARES Act and Paycheck Protection Program. Tell us about your experience in exploring these programs.
It's been a challenge. When that law was passed, not everything was set up to accept the applications, who qualified, what the rules were changed quite a bit, almost hour by hour, up until April 3rd, I believe, was the date you could file. The banks, most banks weren't set up to do it, so earliest we could apply was April 6th. What was required was very, very challenging. We got our application in. We were hoping to get it approved rather quickly, but it's going much slower than we anticipated. I completely understand why. You know, it's like the unemployment applications. There's a great deal of demand, and the system isn't set up to accept it. But understanding the rules, and even today, the rules are not crystal clear on how you're supposed to do certain things. So we're wrestling with, who do we put on furlough? Are we better off keeping them on payroll? Is the employee better off being on unemployment? A business like ours may or may not come back to the same employment after this virus initially, because we're dependent on the auto industry. And if people buy less vehicles, we sell less parts. So when you're figuring out what your employment is going to be post-virus or post this crisis, there's some issues there that could impact the forgiveness. There's issues of putting people on unemployment and how fast they're going to get their checks, and they got to put food on their table, and how do we support them? There's issues about retaining key people. So there's a lot of things going on, but I think we're up for the challenge.
Let's continue that thought about the forward vision post-pandemic. It's got to be a measured approach. How do you see it unfolding, the economy rebooting?
Let me just say, as it relates to my industry, the auto industry, I think there's going to be there might be an initial thrust of demand, but I don't think it's going to go back to exactly where it was prior to the virus. So in our case, we are, as I said, we're on most of the vehicles made in North America. So prior to this virus, there was a pace for production in North America of 16.5 million vehicles. We're thinking that this year will end up being 13 million or something like that. But come 2021, when hopefully we're 6 months past this, I would expect auto demand to be down. I would be very surprised if there's the same thirst for new cars when you just got done worrying about taking care of your family and your 401k went down. I'm hopeful that's not the case, but I think that's going to be the case, and we'll just have to attack that. The nice thing I think about Century Mold is I think we're a very, very good company, and I think unfortunately there's going to be some companies that don't make it through it, so we'll be able to help out in that regard. And on top of that, I'm hopeful that people realize manufacturing is important in the United States, and there'll be more opportunities for U.S. manufacturers as a result of this awakening of how much stuff has been outsourced.
It is certainly an impact that is yet to be measured. Ron Ricotta, Century Mold CEO, thank you so much for taking the time today.
See you later. Bye.